Hello everybody, this is Zoomies. I've been getting a lot of requests to do a controller settings video for SaberTailor, so I spent the past week and a half trying to learn it and understand it, and I'll be using two mods. One is called ControllerHelper, and the other is obviously SaberTailor. Both mods I'll have linked down in the description. This mod also works for any headset across any platform, Quest standalone included, so no worries about that. If you are on PC, I highly recommend Easy Offset though, of course, so I just have to put in that plug. I will also, I have a small disclaimer. This will be similar to Electrostat's controller settings video for SaberTailor. It is slightly dated. I have not watched that before doing this. I mean, I have a long time ago, but I mostly forgot everything, and I kind of wanted to create my own method, something that was very understandable, not influenced, so I'm not spitting out the same exact information somebody else is, and effectively just stealing a video idea and video information. So I'm going to try my best to give you guys the most understandable method that I would use when using SaberTailor. So to start off, first things first, we're going to go to ControllerHelper, and we will enable the axis arrows in the menu and in the replays. I don't think I'll be needing to use the replays for this tutorial, but if you find a method or you were to follow Electrostat's video, you will be using the axis arrows and replays, and basically it just tells you what directions you're going to be moving. It kind of gives you a better idea of like how to set your position, your rotation in game. For me, I don't need it. I will probably not be looking at replays to adjust my rotation or anything based off of the axis. I will just be looking for curve if I do look for a replay. And then the third thing you'll want to do is enable custom controller settings method, which removes all base game offsets within your game. It'll set everything to 0 so you have a clean slate. So after you're done with that, click OK. And after that, I'm immediately going to go into SaberTailor, and I will set a base position. Basically, what I want to do is I want to make these Saber settings as stable as possible before I go ahead and test to see where everything is at curve-wise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my hand out, do a doorknob maneuver, and I'm going to be focusing on this little white circle at the back of my hilt. I'm going to set it so it does not move, which means we will have a stable positioning on our right hand at the very least. After I'm finished with that, I'll probably skip through the left. All I'll really need to show is just one side of things. It's basically the same process for each, so no worries with that. Just for the sake of time, of course. And I'll be explaining everything as I do it with one hand, and you can just do the same with the left. So anyway, starting off, doing a doorknob maneuver. If you take a close look, when I twist my wrist, you'll see that the back of the hilt actually does a little scoop motion, which means it's orbiting around my controller, which is what we don't want, because when that happens, if you were to say play a tech map with a lot of angles where you're like doing wrist rolls or something like that, you're adding a lot of extra rotation that's completely unnecessary, and it adds a little bit of unpredictability for where your saber is going to be at. So you want to completely eliminate that by making sure this doesn't move at all. Well, the back of the hilt. So to start off, you can slowly rotate your wrist and pay attention to where the position is at in the beginning. So when I go here, I can tell that the saber is a little bit below because it has this little motion that goes under and around. So I'm just going to raise my Y position, which will completely move my saber upwards a little bit. And we'll see a decent change in a second. So now we are no longer doing a scooping motion, but now it's just like a little curve on the left side. So that means my saber is too far to the left when I'm doing this. So now we're just going to move position X to the right. It's still a little bit to the left. Okay, so now it looks like we're a little bit too high on my Y positioning. So I'm going to move that down to like 1.5. There's a little bit of an upwards movement here, so I'm going to move down a little bit. And I'll do this. So see, that was pretty simple. All we wanted to do was stabilize this point so it doesn't move when I twist my wrist. And the only movement that's happening is just my arm and my wrist shaking, basically. But otherwise, our positioning is basically completely perfect. So any wrist movement, twisting, my saber will stay in a very predictable position, and I'll be able to know exactly where my saber is moving. So if there is any bad cuts or any misses, I know that it is my fault, and it is not the fault of my controller settings, or it'll be more my fault is all I'm saying. So position Z is something that is used that you can kind of stabilize as well. So as you can tell, when I'm moving my saber up and down, which is what you would test your position Z on, you see that the axis or the pivot point is around the middle here. And I want this to be a little bit further out because I'm losing like angle and swing. The only thing is that helps with a pivot point that's further towards the center of the saber is you get more saber control. But it's a little bit trippy and it can mess with your timing. So you can kind of find a good Z positioning, and it is pretty relative. It just depends on how you play and what kind of maps you like to play. But for me, I like to move mine out so the little circle at the back doesn't move very much, and it adds a little bit more stability and it helps me understand my replays better. So I'm going to move this forward. Oops. And now look at this. So now when I swing my sabers, the circle barely moves, and I can tell that there's barely any orbit or anything. It is very stable. This whole positioning right here, it's extremely stable. So now we have our base to build off of. I will now go to the left hand. Just bear with me for that. There's going to be a small cut. Okay, so I got the positioning good on my left hand already. As you can see, it's pretty stable. And the swing is very similar to my right hand. Both of these, the very back of the saber stays in the same position generally when swinging up and down and when rolling. So this is pretty satisfying beginning. The only thing is when we get to rotation and we adjust our curve, anytime you adjust your curve, you will have to readjust your position and get back to it. But it's always good to start with a base positioning so you know exactly what's going on and you have a more clear view of where your curve is at. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this profile. That's our base. And that should show up right here. And after that, I'll press OK. And then we'll proceed into a map to see where our curve is at and kind of adjust from there. But already, from what I can tell, my sabers seem to be pretty inward. When I swing normally, you can see that it kind of just faces inward. This is my hand pointing straight forward, and it's already got that curve that's just like pointing inwards, so it's going to be a little bit weird looking. And you'll even be able to get a better view of that in the bottom right corner of my screen. I'll have a little swing camera, and you'll be able to see that the tip of my saber will line up more with the center of that swing camera, or cut camera, and you'll be able to tell that my curve is just completely inward. I also have really bright trails on the tips of my sabers, so it'll be a lot easier to notice what kind of curve I have. But without further ado, as you can tell, my sabers are predominantly swinging towards the inside of each block. And that's because my rotation is off towards the inside. So it's a bit rough, and it's hard to hack everything, and it also feels pretty unnatural to me. So it's gonna be hard to get good hit scores when playing a map. If I wanted to try to hack with this inward curve, I'd have to move my arms in real life outwards, like this. I have to completely readjust my whole positioning. And for some people this could work, but it also expends a lot more energy because your arms are away from your body, so you have to constantly hold them up. Whereas if you were to have a more outward curve, your arms would be forced more inward, and they'd be able to be supported by your body more. You wouldn't have to use nearly as much arm, and therefore it wouldn't tire you out on maps that are like faster. I'm also going to play out the whole map just to show a reference of the beginning of the controller settings, and you'll be able to see my improvement as my settings get better. Alrighty, so as you could probably tell, I did have that inward curve as I said before, and my scores, my accuracy scores were not that great, and I also had a decent amount of underswing on my left hand. So that indicates I have a balancing issue where my swing bias was clearly a bit too low, so I should raise that where my saber points more upward, like this, by default. So if I were to hold my saber out, you can already see it's pointing a little bit more downward as compared to the true Z versus the relative Z axis. So it points more downward, and I want that to point upwards, so I have the full 70 points that I should be getting, or it'll at least help. Maybe I have a skill issue on my swings, but who knows. That's besides the point. So basically, with that in mind, with me having inward curve on both sides, we'll go ahead and adjust our rotation. Now that we are adjusting our rotation, every time I move my rotation X or my rotation Y, I will have to readjust my position because it completely moves on this point. So if I were to move my saber like to point left or outwards, because we want it to point this way to counteract the inward curve, it'll turn on this point, which means it'll start to move my saber like this. So if I turn my saber, it's going to start orbiting around my controller like that. But it's not going to be that major. This was just me kind of moving my wrist. But you'll see in a second. So there are references in parentheses showing which way the rotation X and the rotation Y will move your sabers. But depending on how you hold your sabers when you swing, that will change. And I'm on index right now. And the way I swing is I have my X pointing upwards, and I swing like this with mostly my wrist. So that means my rotation X will be left and right, and my rotation Y will be up and down. You can move your rotation Z, which basically just means that you're controlling the relative axis, and you're turning it so it lines up more. So basically, I'd have to go to like negative 90 degrees to get my Y to end up where this Y would be if I were to turn it sideways. And it'll just keep on going up like that, and it'll add like a better idea of a reference. But since I already translated it in my head, it's so much easier for me to just do this myself without having to have the help of the rotation Z. So I'm just going to proceed without using rotation Z. So now that we're like this, we want my right saber to move outward. Only by a little bit. There wasn't a lot of outward curve, but we'll go ahead and check. So see how I'm clicking this to the right. It is moving my saber on this center point right here, and it's making it point more outwards. And now watch when I rotate. Look at all that orbit. I have my arm completely still, my wrist completely still, but the saber, the hilt, is moving around a lot. So now we have a very unstable position. So we have to completely redo that, and then we'll go back and test. So bear with me, I'm going to adjust my position again. So this is a decent amount upwards, going into the negatives here. We got that upward scoop still going. Still a little bit of an upward scoop. Tiny bit. And a little bit to the left. Okay, so this seems to be pretty stable. The right saber is no longer moving around when I twist it, and now we have our rotation X and our inward curve more or less compensated for. So from there, I'm going to go to my left hand. Alright, so that looks good. From there, I'll press OK. So now, both my sabers are pretty stable. And we'll go back in and see how these play, if I can do better than almost a 96. I think it was a 95.98 last time.
What is this? What have we found? The circles that I run in seem so lonely now. Day's a gift, yes somehow.
So I can already tell that both my hands I overcompensated, and there is an outward curve on my left as well as a minor outward curve on my right. If you pay attention to the bottom right corner of my screen, you'll see that the tip of the saber is no longer pointing inwards, and it is on the outside of the hilt. But I no longer have to feel really uncomfortable in moving my arms outwards, and I feel a lot more calm, and I'm not wasting nearly as much energy. Alright, so we obviously have a very substantial improvement. Everything felt so much more comfortable, and it made things a lot easier. And I even had less underswing on that top row because I adjusted my balance, so my swing bias is more upwards. Though, I guess those bottom row upward swings didn't really help. But, yeah, you can see a very substantial improvement. I promise I didn't put any more or less effort into this run compared to the last one. So, this is just pure statistical data that's happening right now. But anyway, with that in mind, I had outward curve on both my right and my left hand. I'm going to get this as close to perfect as possible for the end of the video. So we are going to start off with my left hand, which had the more major curve outwards. And for that, all I have to do is just move this way a little bit. We're going to go down to like 10. And this might be inward, so I'm going to go ahead and move that to like 15-ish degrees. And I'm going to move that to 10. And so now we have, obviously, our position issues again, making that little scoop motion on the backside there. So I am going to adjust that and make that look good again. Okay, that was easy. That was only a position Y issue, it looks like. Okay. Yeah, could have done so with X as well. So, yeah, that's basically that. Now it looks perfect. I don't know why I teleported back. Okay, so now it looks perfect. And this will probably feel a lot better. If anything, it'll be possibly a bit more inward. But we'll see once I get back into the game. I'm going to adjust my rotation X a little bit and see how that goes. So now we have adjusted the rotation on the right hand. Looks great. Once again, left hand looks great position-wise. And we're going to go ahead, press OK, and then go back in and try once more. And we'll see if there's any improvement from there as well.
What is this? What have we found? The circles that I run in seem so lonely now. Day's a gift, yeah, somehow. Still I'm running round this town to make you feel a bit commodified and froze out. Performative concerns, the concern now. Just something to be seen, talking about, no doubt. But I keep holding my pace through impossible days. The void keeps calling my name. It's the only way. Get through. Let's get through. Let's get through.
Alright, so there is a slight improvement still. And as your settings are closer to perfect, and the adjustments get smaller, your AC gain or your improvement will be smaller and smaller. It may or may not be noticeable to a point, and that's where you go ahead and you either feel completely satisfied with them, or if you want to make them truly perfect and you want to completely be sure that there is no curve on your swings whatsoever, you can go ahead and watch your replay on the map like this. And you should be able to easily tell from there what kind of curve you have. But yeah, that's basically that. From what I saw in my replay, my right and my left seem to be both slightly inwards, which is actually perfect for me. From what I've learned doing my own settings constantly, I can tell I always play better on an inward curve. Just as another disclaimer, perfect settings are not always perfectly straight swings. Some people play better on an outward curve and some people play better on an inward curve. I happen to play better on a slightly more inward curve for both my hands. It all depends a lot on how you play, so just, be mindful of how you play, what feels the best, and what makes you play the best. Try to find a healthy middle ground for your settings so you don't strain yourself. And yeah, that's basically that as far as I know. So once you're done with that and you're pretty sure that your settings are great, you can just go ahead and save the new profile. And there you go. So those are your settings. And that's the whole video. Just as an afterthought, this took a little while to edit, and I sincerely apologize but I'm gonna do a quick plug to my controller settings commissions, because I do those. If you would like to stay for the rest of that, I would very much appreciate it if you even just took a look. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a very nice day. Also now do controller settings commissions. It's only for a low price of $5, and I've done quite a few people already. If you don't think it's worth it, you can take the word of others who I've done settings for, And even if you cannot pay the $5, I have another friend who is willing to do your settings for absolutely no cost. But anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.